Hey everyone, this is 77. One thing I'm sure most of the community are itching to learn about is what the handling model will be like in Need for Speed Heat. Recently, Ghost released a new Under the Hood article for Need for Speed Heat. This one in particular is about the game's handling model. In this video, I'll go over the article and explain how the handling will work in Need for Speed Heat. I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty surprising that Ghost has decided to address this topic head on like this, but I'm glad they have due to how controversial the handling models of the last couple games were. I'll have a link to the article in the description so you can have a read of it for yourself. But anyway, they open the article stating that their handling models in the past have always been about performing huge drifts at high speeds. But they addressed a big issue these models had where it becomes, quote, the only way to negotiate corners if you want to set the fastest time on an event, which is of course not how real life racing works. I'm very glad to see that they've acknowledged this. The biggest issue with the handling model in past games was that when you drifted around a corner, a weird drift boost effect happens, which allows your car to get around the corner quicker by drifting rather than by slowing down and taking the corner properly. Following this, Ghost goes into detail on how they're improving the handling for this game. Ghost says that they, quote, exposed more of the core handling system to allow players to build and modify their cars in more detail. This will allow a vehicle to have an asymmetric and non-optimal but fun to drive handling setup. For example, having a powerful engine while still having stock tires or gearbox. This allows players to tune their cars away from the more balanced stock handling, which skilled players might find too easy and arcade, towards a more realistic grip handling or drift handling depending on which you prefer. So it sounds like the handling of the cars will depend on what kind of parts you decide to install rather than just by switching stability control on and off like in Payback. But how does this work? Later in the article it states that, quote, in Need for Speed Heat, you can apply several parts in 3 distinct categories that change the handling performance, those being suspension, differential, and tires. Each of these items will move the car's handling style towards either race, drift, off-road, or road. If you watch the gameplay trailer, you probably remember this graph when the video was talking about customization. Pretty much where your car sits on this graph will depend on the parts you decide to install on your car. Race and drift control the way your car handles, off-road and road control on what surface you want to have an advantage. So if you get more drift parts than race parts, the point on the graph will sway more towards drift. The same principle applies to off-road and road, as based on your choices and parts you can have your car perform better on either rough terrain or tarmac. Or you can leave those parts as default if you want a car that will work fine on both kinds of environments. So that's pretty much a gist of it when it comes to the handling model itself. Now let's talk about the game's drifting mechanics. Ghost starts by saying, quote, we have also worked with the drifting mechanic and especially the so-called brake to drift mechanic side effect. We wanted to allow experienced and dedicated players to be able to build a car, tuning it closer to real-world expectations and be able to beat someone who has left their car remain at stock handling. Yes, awesome. That's exactly what I wanted to see with the handling model in this game. The way I see it, the brake to drift should just be a way for players new to the series to get a feel for the game, but later down the road, if they want to do well in the harder races or in multiplayer, they should feel encouraged to tune their cars more towards grip, as that handling model should in theory allow the player to drive around a course much faster compared to someone that is drifting. Ghost went into more detail on how drifting works in the game by describing the 3 ways to get your car into a drift. They explained the first saying, quote, drifting has also been reworked to allow players to use the power of the engine to get the car into a drift or power slide. Simply stabbing the throttle while steering hard will make the tires lose enough grip to allow it to drift. So this method is actually replacing the brake to drift mechanic where instead of tapping the brake to get into a drift, you sort of double tap the throttle to do what's called a clutch kick in order to initiate a drift. The second way to get your car into a drift is by tuning the brake bias to allow the brakes to transfer weight to the front wheels, causing the rear wheels to lose grip and enter a drift. So basically this method allows the player to naturally enter a drift by turning the car itself. If you've played Payback, it's similar to how you initiate a drift while driving a drift class car. Finally, the third way you can get your car into a drift is by, quote, using the handbrake, which is preferably used in tighter corners and hairpins. Makes sense, we've seen this feature in past games. But regardless of how you choose to initiate your drifts, the way you control drifts is a bit different to how you would have done so in past games. Ghost says that they have, quote, evolved the drift mechanics to make use of the player's skill and control even further for drift builds, with the addition of throttle-controlled drift. Ghost explains this mechanic, saying that if the throttle is pushed all the way down while in a drift, it will cause the car to spin out. In order to maintain a perfect drift, the player needs to feather the throttle. This is very, very cool actually, because it will make the drifting a far more challenging and skill-based aspect of this game. I don't know how much of a skill curve there is to the drifting, as I'm yet to play the game myself, but this is something I'm very interested in trying out once the game officially launches in November. And that's pretty much the gist of this article. Overall, it's a very informative article, and I hope we see more stuff like this in the near future. But based on the article's closing statement, we shouldn't have to wait too long for another one, this time on performance customization. Once it releases, you can expect me to do a video on it, so click subscribe so you can see it as soon as it releases. If you're a fan of classic Need for Speed games, I highly suggest you check out my series called 25 Years of Need for Speed, where I revisit every game in this series from 1994 to now. A link to my newest episode where I check out Need for Speed The Run will be present at the end of this video. But other than that, I hope you're having a very good day. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.